It's showing like all the black and like all your.
It should be going.
What?
It should be going.
Oh, it should be. Oh my God.
Pueblo City County Library District Virtual Public Author Talk. I'm Nick Potter, Director of Community Relations and Development for the Pueblo City County Library District, and it is my pleasure to welcome you this evening. Tonight, we are broadcasting live from the Robert Hoag Rawlings Public Library. If you have not visited the main branch of the Pueblo City County Library District recently, you are in for a shock because it's undergoing a $12.5 million renovation. Construction will wrap up at the end of 2022, so be sure to come to the library soon to see all of the amazing things this renovated facility has to offer. This is the third year that we have held the Public Author Talk as a virtual event. Next year, we are excited to host you in our new Riles Grand Event Space and see everyone in person. While we are in a virtual setting again this year, we aim to create this public author talk as a fun, interactive, and virtual event. For our viewers joining us from home, after you visited the event website and clicked the play button, you are ready to view and enjoy this evening's program. There are no additional steps needed to enjoy this evening's program. However, here are a couple of notes so you can fully enjoy tonight's event. You can pause the live program at any point in the event. Just click the pause icon on the bottom left of the screen. All comments have been pre-submitted via the registration form for this event and have already been selected for the author. So now sit back, relax, and enjoy the 2022 All Pueblo Reads Public Author Talk. Tonight we will celebrate literacy and lifelong learning. The Public Author Talk and author presentations are a culmination of events as part of All Pueblo Reads. This year's All Pueblo Reads hosted more than 70 events, both in person and in a virtual setting. The Library District worked to develop an All Pueblo Reads that reflects our needs currently and provided programming and resources to our community that promote healthy mental wellness activities. The mission of All Pueblo Reads is to get everyone in Pueblo County reading and discussing one book at the same time. The 2022 All Pueblo Reads book selection is The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. Ms. Hannah is joining us this evening so we can have a conversation about her award-winning novel, The Four Winds. The Four Winds is an indelible portrait of America and the American dream set during a dark period of our history, the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. The themes of gratitude and perseverance during difficult times made this book a perfect choice when selecting a book that displayed the need for healthy mental health practices. It is a story of a family's search for a better life during unprecedented times. This is a novel about a country in crisis, at war with itself. It's a novel about our hubris, about people displaced and how they are treated in tough times. It's about devastating climate change that was partially of our own making. This event is a fundraiser for the Pueblo Library Foundation and allows the library to further deliver its mission to the community. This evening is possible because of library supporters like you and our generous All Pueblo Reads and Public Author Talk sponsors. Allow me to thank the generous individuals and businesses that supported the 2022 All Pueblo Reads and Public Author Talk. At the diamond level, the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read Program, Friends of the Pueblo Library, Black Hills Energy, HW Houston Construction, and Health Colorado. Sponsors at the gold level include Pueblo Community College and Bank of the San Juans. Sponsors at the silver level, Benefits Broker, HBM Architects LLC, InBank, Kin and Gala White Family Foundation, Pueblo Kiwanis Foundation, Solid Earth Civil Constructors, Inc., Credit Union of Colorado, Goal High School, and Pueblo Community Health Center. Sponsors at the bronze level, Anderson Mason Dale, Angelus Chapel Mortuaries, A New Leaf Therapy, New Image Drywall LLC, the Pueblo Mall, Royal Electrical Services, and Vectra Bank, Colorado. Thank you to our generous sponsors. You have already made this evening and All Pueblo Reads a great success. I would be remiss if I did not highlight the generous gift from our author this evening. Thanks to Kristin Hannah and her incredible generosity, PCCLD was able to provide more than 1,600 copies of her books to our community. This is an unprecedented donation by an All Pueblo Reads author. From the Pueblo City County Library District and the Pueblo community, I wish to extend a huge thank you to Ms. Kristin Hannah. Tonight we are here to celebrate the Pueblo City County Library District. On September 30th, 2022, the Pueblo City County Library District Board of Trustees appointed Mrs. Sherry Baca as Executive Director. Sherry was chosen by a unanimous vote and is the first Hispanic woman to serve as the Library District's Executive Director and Chief Librarian. Sherry brings a warmth and energy to this position, and we are so excited to see what heights she takes our already fantastic library district to. I would like to welcome Sherry to the event to provide an address about the state and future of the Pueblo Library in our community.
Hello, and thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for participating in the 2022 All Pueblo Reads program. All Pueblo Reads is a community-wide literary program which is 18 years strong this year. This year, the Pueblo City County Library District is proud to bring you the literary works of Kristin Hannah, Alicia Ortego, and Ross Gay. I am Sherry Baca, and I was recently named the Executive Director of the Pueblo City County Library District. This new role is an exciting opportunity for me to help shape the public library and to help lead our wonderful staff to continue to provide excellent library materials, services, and library spaces. Many things about All Pueblo Reads is remarkable this year. Author Kristin Hannah has gifted the library $20,000 to bring her books to the readers of Pueblo, Colorado. PCCLD was named a recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read Grant, and Health Colorado sponsored and partnered with PCCLD to create mental wellness story times and provide copies of Alicia Ortego's My Superpower Is series, featuring mental wellness and topics for children. This year's All Pueblo Reads theme focuses on mental wellness. All of us from every age group are enjoying the wonderful storytelling in all of the reading choices this year. All Pueblo Reads invites our community to read the same book and enjoy over 70 library programs and events during the month of October, with the goal of generating discussion that crosses cultural, generational, and socioeconomic lines. All Pueblo Reads is a fantastic program that invites our is promising and bright. All Pueblo Reads is not the only activity that we have accomplished at the library this year. We have nearly completed the $12.5 million renovation of the Rawlings Library. The Rawlings renovation project refreshes the interior of this magnificent building and which serves as a beacon of learning in the Pueblo community. We invite you to visit the Rawlings Library, have a warm beverage at PJ's Coffee, enjoy our new layout of library materials, and visit the colorful and fun children's area. We have new collections of books that we are very proud of, collections sponsored by the Pueblo chapter of the NAACP and the Arc of Pueblo. Reading Pays, Pueblo's $1 million reading challenge, and the summer reading program of 2022 have come to a successful completion with over 8,000 children enjoying reading over the summer, and many of them earning $100 if they checked out 10 books and turned in a reading report to the library. These programs encourage youth to find fun in reading and enjoy the new things one can find and experience in visiting a library. Without a doubt, the continued success of these programs this year have positively impacted the kids and families in Pueblo. We want to sincerely thank the City of Pueblo and the County of Pueblo for jointly funding Reading Pays again for a second consecutive year. I want to assure you that PCCLD is continually active, ensuring that Pueblo County has the best possible public library experience. Through continual improvement to our facilities, community services, and materials, we aim to serve our community in an impactful and vital way. Programs like Reading Pays and All Pueblo Reads serve as a great method to show our community members that reading can be fun, impactful, and life-changing. I want to thank our sponsors of this year's All Pueblo Reads program. It is through their support that we are able to bring this reading program to our community. I also want to thank everyone here for participating in All Pueblo Reads. Learning and discovering new stories and places and placing importance on mental health and well-being is so important. It is our wish to you that the rest of 2022 will bring blessings and other opportunities for discovery, learning, and reading. We invite you to visit a public library in your neighborhood. Library staff are ready to welcome you warmly at any Pueblo City County Library location. Thank you so much and enjoy the remainder of All Pueblo Reads.
Thank you, Sherry. Your excitement and advocacy for Pueblo and its public library is apparent and infectious. Thank you for your work to ensure that PCCLD thrives and provides Pueblo County with the best possible public library experience now and into the future. Now for our featured presentation. Each year, PCCLD, through the All Pueblo Reads project, features a piece of literature and brings an author to promote dialogue across cultural, generational, and socioeconomic lines. This year is the 18th year of All Pueblo Reads. This year, All Pueblo Reads is part of the NEA Big Read program. The NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment of the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. The selected book for 2022 is The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. We are pleased to virtually host Miss Hannah and look forward to hearing from her and receiving insights into her literature. Kristin Hannah is an award-winning and best-selling author of more than 21 novels, including the international blockbusters The Nightingale, The Great Alone, as well as Winter Garden, Night Road, and Firefly Lane. Kristin's latest novel, The Four Winds, debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. The Four Winds has been described as epic and transporting, a stirring story of hardship and love, majestic and absorbing by USA Today. People magazine has called it a spectacular tour de force that shines a spotlight on the indispensable but often overlooked role of the greatest generation of women. Kristin's breakthrough novel, Firefly Lane, is currently #1 in paperback trade fiction, and its TV adaptation is the #1 Netflix series worldwide. The film of Hannah's much-loved novel, The Nightingale, published in 43 languages, starring Dakota Fanning and Elle Fanning, is slated for release in 2023. Her 2017 novel, The Great Alone, has also been optioned for the screen. Kristin is a former lawyer turned writer who lives in the Pacific Northwest with her husband. She can't imagine a better career than writing every day and doesn't miss practicing law or wearing heels to work. Kristin writes because it frees something in her and allows her to be a wife, mother, and friend. The friend, the wife, the mother that she wants to be. Kristin's work touches millions of people. Her novel, Firefly Lane, became a runaway bestseller in 2009, a touchstone novel that brought women together. And The Nightingale in 2015 was voted a best book of the year by Amazon, BuzzFeed, iTunes, Library Journal, Paste, The Wall Street Journal, and The Week. Additionally, the novel won the coveted Goodreads and People's Choice Awards. The audiobook of The Nightingale won the Audiobook of the Year award in the category of fiction. Her #1 New York Times bestselling novel, The Great Alone, won the 2018 Goodreads Best Historical Novel of the Year and appeared on numerous best of lists. Renowned for her strong female characters, Hannah's books are read, discussed, and revered by book clubs all over the country. Kristin Hannah, thank you for joining us this evening, and I really want to give a very warm Pueblo, Colorado welcome to you today.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. What a great program this is already.
I mean, I think our community and I have a million questions for you. So the first one I'd really like to ask you is, we've really enjoyed your books over the last month or so, but I understand that you haven't always been a writer or considered yourself a writer. Can you just start this evening by telling us your story? How did you become a writer, and how did you become a published writer?
Gosh, that's kind of it's a long story because I've been doing this a long time. But to go back to the, sort of my origin story, as you pointed out, I was a lawyer. And I was in my final year of law school when my mother was at the end of her battle with breast cancer. And so I was spending, all of my days at the hospital after classes. And one day I was complaining about one of my law school classes, and she said, well, you know, you don't even have to worry about that. You're going to be a writer anyway. And it was the most remarkable moment because I had never written a word of fiction. I had no interest in it. I was, of course, a huge reader. You know, my mom, we all went to the library at 6, and that was the beginning. You know, books constantly in the house. And so, you know, she knew sort of my sensibility. But, you know, for her to think that I would be a writer was remarkable. And at that time, I was really young, 25, maybe 24, something like that. Anyway, and so she said we should write a book together. And so, you know, being mother and daughter, we immediately sort of started arguing about what kind of books to write. And I wanted to write horror. She wanted to write historical romance. And so basically, she said, I'm sick, I win, we're writing historical romance. And that was kind of the beginning. Every day after class, I would go to the library and stand in the stacks and make Xeroxes, because there was, of course, no internet then. You had to actually go and make Xerox copies of the pages from the historical books. And we would, you know, sit and just imagine this book. We plotted it, you know, all of that. And after she passed away, I just put all of that material, the idea, the talking, the research, I put it all in a box and just filed it away. And you know, went on with life. I passed the bar and started practicing law. And it wasn't until a few years later, when I got pregnant with my son, and I had a difficult pregnancy and ended up being bedridden for many months, that I sort of thought about this writing thing. And so I pulled out this box that had all this material in it, and kind of like a gift from my mom. And I just thought, I'll write a book. How hard can it be? And I thought I would, you know, do this until first grade, that I'd give myself 5 years to try to get something published. And if not, I would go back to the law. And my first book was published when my son was 2. So I've been doing this ever since.
Wow, that's such a cool story. Just curious, horror was your first genre that you thought of? I mean, can you talk about that?
Well, you know, I'm a total geek, basically. You know, I'm a huge Stephen King and horror fan, and have been since I was in high school. Big fantasy, big epic, you know, Tolkien, all of that. And it just, when I was in my 20s, my early 20s, it just seemed that's like a really cool thing to do. But and I still read a lot. I read a lot of horror, read a lot of thrillers, I read a lot of fantasy. Um, and ultimately, when I decided to actually um, pursue a career at this, I was, as I pointed out, a young mother, and I didn't want to live in the headspace that horror required. So I think that's why I let that one go.
That makes a lot of sense. So I guess, you know, thinking of that kind of headspace that you have to live in while you're an author and you're trying to write these things, you know, many people that I've talked to who have read The Four Winds and other of your books just can't get over how viscerally they feel about the settings and the events in your books. I even had one woman that said, I can literally taste the dust when I read the book.
Yeah.
So, you know, can you talk about the details in your story and tell us about your research process and how you get into that headspace to create such creative settings and events that are just so vivid?
Well, you know, that's an interesting thing. And I think that it actually interestingly relates to my love of epic fantasy and this idea of world building. I have always loved really immersive fiction. And so when I, you know, sort of turned my head towards historical fiction, it felt really important to me to really put a reader in the middle of all of this and make you really understand what the Dust Bowl meant, and what the Great Depression meant, and what this generation we call the greatest generation actually endured. I mean, you guys probably have a lot of people in your community who remember this time period. And so, for me, it was really important to be not only as accurate as I could factually, because that's obviously the starting point, but also emotionally, and also, sort of in the broader sense, to take a modern reader and put them into someone else's shoes. Because I think that's one of the great gifts of all kinds of fiction, this ability to create empathy, to let you actually understand what somebody else has experienced, and how they feel about it, and what it did to their family. And I think, sometimes empathy is missing in the world today. And so any book, I think, that can bring people together, it's worth doing. And with regard to research, I begin globally with what's happening in the world. Why am I interested in this? And I just research until I find a story that I would say I haven't read before, that hits me on an emotional level, and has something to say about the modern world. That's what I'm looking for in historical fiction.
So, I guess I just kind of imagine you sitting maybe in a library in a park somewhere on, the eastern plains of Colorado, in the middle of kind of a dusty field, riding the four winds. Do you visit these places? Like, how do you get so into them? Like, I really want to know that setting process.
Well, just as a small aside, if you're going to imagine me writing, the former lawyer in me is still around, and I write all my books longhand on yellow legal pads with a certain pen. And the reason I do that is it's because I can do it anywhere. I can do it on the car, on the beach, in my backyard. I can write anywhere and everywhere. And that is, to me, one of the real gifts of being a writer. Is I don't go to an office every day. I don't sit at a desk every day. I'm very much, I guess, more creative and a little bit freer in that regard. And I guess, I don't know, I just follow the historical thread to a story that is super compelling. And when I read what the people who lived in the area that's called the Dust Bowl endured, I was astounded. And that hadn't even really been raised in my high school. And so I just thought it was so important, especially with issues of climate change going on right now, and some of the divisions in our country. It just seemed like a really relevant story to bring back to the fore, and to do it from a feminine perspective is something that's very important to me, to sort of pass along lost women's histories to today's readers.
And I read an article about kind of your process, where you still keep, I can't remember if it's 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 hours to make sure that your creative process stays intact. Is that true?
I do. I mean, it's writing is very much a passion for me. I do it more than I have to. I work more than I have to. But it's also a job. And I think that there's a lot of sort of mythology that comes with writing, and a lot of terminology that sort of equates it to magic, or something like that. And I'm a firm believer that you have to sit in the seat, you have to put in the work, and then the ideas will come to you, and then your creativity will sort of be unleashed. And so I spend a lot of days, like other writers, sitting in the chair, writing stuff that nobody will ever read or will ever want to read, but somehow it gets me to where I'm going. And I'm also a very editorial writer. So the first draft of the book often bears almost no resemblance, plot or characters, to the book that's actually published.
Wow. Yeah, and with your kind of editorial process, I also read that you have a box that says, "Do not publish even after death."
Well, actually, that is the book that I wrote sort of with my mom. So
Oh.
it's that very first book, that historical romance that I thought, oh, how hard can it be? And wrote, in sort of one long, breathless stroke, and had no idea what I was doing. And, at the end of it, when I realized that it was not good enough, that's when I sort of had to have a real serious talk with myself, and realize that when you set out to become a writer, um, you are accepting this challenge, or at least you were in those days, that you may never be published, that you could pour your heart and soul into this year after year, and never be published. But I think what I learned ultimately is, and a lot of people have learned this through journaling or other ways of writing, the writing itself is so transformative sometimes. And I say often that I don't go to therapy because I write, and that's basically, I get to work out all my issues through imaginary people. But it's really transformative just to spend your time reading and writing.
That's awesome. We actually, in our book lovers ball kits that people have at home, we gave everyone a gratitude journal so that they can do exactly what you're talking about, is use that as kind of a catharsis, and write their feelings and write what's going on in their day and the good things. So that's a great, I'm glad you said that.
That is so important and valuable. And not only that, I think, because I meet people all the time who say, I have a story to tell, I want to be a writer. And not everyone necessarily is going to become a novelist or a successful published writer. But that does not in any way diminish your ability to tell your own story, and to get your own story down on paper and to pass it along for your children. And I think one of the things that's so important about historical fiction and books like The Four Winds and The Nightingale is they can encourage intergenerational conversation. And I would love it, if young people read the book The Four Winds, and then ask their grandparents what they remember of that time, what was happening in their lives, and sort of allowing the generations to connect through history.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point of this All Pueblo Reads program. Is, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. You almost said our mission statement.
Great.
So, Kristin, we know, or as you know, we featured The Four Winds as part of the All Pueblo Reads program, and we did focus on mental wellness, specifically perseverance and gratitude. The Four Winds, and many, if not all of your books, just like really talk about or have characters who display courage and must endure really trying situations, tumultuous times, and they display characteristics of perseverance and gratitude. Is this intentional, or can you kind of tell us about why or how you add these themes into your books?
Yes, I mean, it's fully intentional. And it's because I think it's so important. I mean, I don't know that I went into it with the knowledge that I now have about it. I think in some ways I kind of stumbled my way through writing, and allowed my writing to sort of reflect my life and my thoughts, and what I believed in. And that's kind of what people call the author's voice. But what I have come to, I guess, as I've gotten older and look around a little more and pay a little bit more attention to the world, I see that all of us in some way or another are faced with incredible challenges and struggles and difficulties. Life can be really hard, and this is a particularly difficult time, in our country right now. And so I think it's really important, crucial, in fact, to remind people um, to look for things to be grateful for, to be reminded of gratitude, to consider others' points of view, and to really sort of join together and help each other with the issues that we're facing. I mean, the last couple of years with COVID have been so difficult for so many of us, and the idea of lending a hand and being aware of other people in distress and looking for your own center. I think they're all just really important conversations that are really coming to the fore now, and I am really glad to see that.
You know, I know that there's a quote that I've read from you where you talk about to endure something truly hard. That's when you need friends and support the most. Can you talk about the importance of relationships, friendships, different relationships that you have with the characters in your book, maybe specifically the Four Winds, and why you do place focus on those relationships and those friendships?
Well, I mean, it's another thing we all learned, through COVID again. You spend a couple of years when you're not being able to see your best friend or your mom or your dad or your brother or your children or your grandchildren, and you realize that sort of being solitary, being isolated, is really difficult for one's mental health. And what that means, I think, and what I've learned throughout that, and since that, is to really focus even more on friendships, on family, on doing things for other people, getting out sort of into the world, because as a writer, I can live a pretty solitary life, and I think it's vital that we connect in that way. And I think you'll see through the Four Winds, for example, the character of Elsa, who begins very isolated, very low self-esteem, very unhappy, and it is really through motherhood and becoming having a mother-in-law who really changes her and impacts her. It's these relationships that teaches Elsa her self-worth, and in finding her self-worth, she finds her voice. And I think that's a very familiar arc for women. It's very easy in a million ways to lose your voice over the course of your life. And I think it's important for our children and our grandchildren that we women speak up and that we say what we have to say, and we come together. And I think a lot of my books sort of reinforce that message of community, especially community of women.
Absolutely. And do coming out of the pandemic, and I think that your work is very pandemic friendly, we'll say. Staying at home, probably wasn't very hard for you, or riding on the beach wasn't probably very hard for you. But I know a lot of people are coming out of the pandemic feeling very alone, feeling very isolated. Writing, researching, using that kind of method that you have of writing. Do you have advice for those people? And if they were, I guess, a character in your book, how would you write them getting out of this kind of mental alone situation?
I would say that it's like sort of overcoming anything that is difficult or frightening in life. It is really easy to sit back and do what is comfortable and not put yourself out there and not take any risk. And that, I think, is further isolating. So what I would say to my characters, what I say to myself, what I say to my son is if you want something in life, and you certainly should, then sometimes you have to like put on the big kid's pants and take a risk and put yourself out there and approach someone that you don't know, or go somewhere uh, to a meeting or something, even if it frightens you. I think something actually like your community book read. I mean, this fact that you have all of these people now who are reading this one book, and it will speak to different people in different ways. And I think it allows a dialogue through fiction, which can also be the beginning of a book group, of a friendship. I've been really amazed as I toured the country sometimes, where women who are in line, waiting to come up and get a book signed, will actually strike up a friendship while they're waiting. And by the time they get to the front of the line, there are 6 women there who didn't know each other before, who are now starting a book group. And so I think anything like that that can get you talking to someone you don't know and keep you talking to someone you do know is the way to become stronger and healthier and more comfortable in your own skin.
That's great advice. And, kind of a great plug for the public library as a community forum for
It is.
people to meet other people, find resources, and just connect, right?
Absolutely.
Well, we're getting questions in from our audience. However, before we do that, I would really like to talk to you, about some of your adaptations to the film, to the screen, I should say. And we all love Firefly Lane in print and on Netflix. And I understand that your book, The Nightingale, has been adapted into a movie. And we want to know, how has it been adapting your books into a movie or a television series? And the big question as bookies is that, well, bookies not in terms of that we may place bids on things, but that we like books. Did you feel like you lost anything doing the movie or the series version of the books, or do you feel like it enhanced your stories? We'd love to hear from you on your perspective as a writer.
That's so interesting. I can say, unfortunately, with the Nightingale, it got stopped by COVID, and they haven't started filming again. So I don't know where that is. I was supposed to go to Budapest and be on set last year, and that couldn't happen. So I was really disappointed about that. They have a beautiful script, and I think the Fanning sisters are amazing. So on that front, I'm really like everybody else, just looking forward to see what they've done with it. But it's sort of to the broader question of adaptations. I see a lot of that online, and comments about it and questions. And I guess what I think is the most important thing is to remember, for me, the author, for the reader, for the viewer, for everybody, to just remember that they're 2 different art forms. And we all want the movie to be as good or better than the book. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. So I think that what you really want is a, a show that captures the heart and soul of a novel, and maybe even improves on it. I mean, there's certainly, I've seen scenes written of my material that I didn't write that I wish I had. So I'm basically like everybody else, just a fan, and hoping that it all goes well.
So speaking of you kind of as just a fan, I'm really curious, what was your initial reaction when Firefly Lane first aired? Like, what did you kind of fangirl, or did you critique it? Like, what was that like?
The most interesting thing about that was, as I was watching Firefly, this was Firefly Lane is a book that's very autobiographical for me. This is the first time I've ever really not only taken on my own life, but sort of publicly done that. And this is about my high school, my junior high, my college years, my mother's cancer, all of these things. And so when I was watching it, the thing that struck me most was they had like completely recreated my house. And it was so bizarre to see my 13-year-old bedroom because I hadn't even remembered that I had done that in the writing. But there are my posters and there's my bedspread, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And then of course I wondered, what do my siblings think? What do the friends from high school think? But everybody seemed happy.
Oh, that's great. So then when you move to the Nightingale adaptation, I know that that's still in process, but were you already kind of a hardened pro after working with Netflix, or was that just as exciting but in a different way?
Well, it's interesting. The difference between TV and motion picture is so different. I mean, I had been working on the Nightingale 3 years before the Firefly Lane people ever even approached me to adapt it. So it just moves really fast. The TV series part. I mean, I can tell you that when Katherine Heigl and Sarah Chalk were cast in Firefly, I was thrilled. And I worked quite a bit actually with the producers of the Nightingale, and gave notes and had some input. And I think they have created a stunningly beautiful script. But I don't know I don't know what happens next.
Well, we will just wait with bated breath,
Yeah.
in a lot of anticipation, because I know in this community that's a very popular book. So you'll have a lot of viewers from Pueblo, Colorado, come to that opening.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Me too.
Well, and speaking of kind of waiting with anticipation, can you talk about the release date for season 2 of Firefly Lane? When can we expect to watch
I
that?
actually know this now. December 2nd.
Ooh, so coming up soon.
Yeah. So everybody can go. I think it's Netflix, so you can put it on your watch list or whatever, and it will tell you, so we can all binge on the same day.
And I obviously read the opening kind of statement introducing you, but in the opening statement, we mentioned that The Great Alone had an option for a movie. Personally, this is my favorite book of yours, so I'd like to selfishly ask if you could talk a little bit about this exciting news.
Yeah, I am actually really excited about The Great Alone. It's moving forward. Like I said, it's a very slow process, all of this. And then, COVID and the confusion sort of in Hollywood and on set, for a couple of years was really difficult. But it's allowed us, I think, to get to a place where we really have a good script on Great Alone. And so now we're just looking for what comes next. I think I don't know actually if it's a series or if it's a film. I think they're thinking film. And I really try not to have a lot of creative influence. I like to be respected. I like to be spoken to, but I'm pretty clear on the fact that what they do isn't what I do. So it ultimately comes out to me making comments based on both being a fangirl of these kinds of books and on my understanding of story, and if I think they've missed the boat somehow. But I can't wait to see Alaska on the big screen. It's just such a stunning landscape.
Well, I mean, the way that you portray the setting of that landscape, I mean, it's going to have to live up to that, I think, in
I know.
your readers' eyes.
Well, and as you know, that it's a big part of my family history, Alaska. My the family business is up there, up in Sterling, the Great Alaska Fish Camp, and so it's a very important and beloved place to my family and me.
All right, at this portion of the evening, we have some time to take some questions that have been pre-submitted from our audience. And so our first question, Kristin, that we received is, what advice do you have for students who are just starting out their writing career?
Read, 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 read. I think the most important thing that you can do to be a writer in general is to read, and read across genres, to read all kinds of books, all kinds of stories, fiction, nonfiction, historical, contemporary, fantasy, thriller. Just read as much as you can, because you will begin to see the stories that speak to you as a reader. And I think it's really important to find those, because those are generally the kind of books that will speak to you as a writer as well. And so you can begin to sort of hone your craft simply by reading really good fiction. And in fact, one of the things I did when I was young and had a baby at home, and I was trying to learn how to be a writer, I took several books that I really admired. The Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy, Anne Rice's The Witching Hour, To Kill a Mockingbird. I can't remember what other books I chose. And I really sort of deconstructed them and diagrammed them and tried to look at what was narrative, what was dialogue, how these stories were told. And that kind of analysis really helped to inform my understanding of what a novel was.
So one of our questions that came in, and you mentioned, read, read, read. Did you have, as you were growing up, were there books that were influential to you? And are there books that you recommend that young writers or young people today read?
There are just so many influential books. There's books that influenced me as a person, as a young person. There's books that influenced me as a writer. I would say that, for me, the books that really have over time influenced my writing the most are books by Pat Conroy, Anne Rice, Stephen King, Gabriel Marquez, are just a few that come to mind. Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I really like epic stories with deep characterizations and a beating heart. So that's really, I think, those are the kind of books that most made me want to be a writer. The Lord of the Rings is another one. But I still love, when I am not writing, I am reading thrillers, I'm reading horror, I'm reading fantasy, all kinds of books. I just love reading.
And I think it's really apparent that you also really love writing, and just putting yourself in those settings. And so as you're thinking of the books that you've written and that you just really enveloped yourself in, do you have a book that you've written that is closest to your heart?
It's so interesting. Authors have very different sort of relationships to our own books, and I've now written a lot of them. So there's a lot of books that I've spent years of my life on that are in my rearview mirror that I don't think about very much or remember all that well. And how I feel about a book as an author is not necessarily related to its reviews or to what people think of it or to what people say about it. So the two books that most changed my life were Firefly Lane in 2010 and The Nightingale, whenever that one was, 2005, 15 maybe. And I think because those were the two books that I accidentally, with grace, however it came about, those are the two books that showed me the path that I was going to be on for this past 2 decades. Firefly Lane was the first time that I had written a novel solely about women, with no male viewpoint, that was deeply personal and deeply emotional and spanned a multitude of decades. And that really was the beginning of me becoming a historical novelist. And then The Nightingale just flat out changed my life. It changed the the people who read me, what they say about me, how that book impacted readers was something that I did not see coming. And so those are the two that are sort of, the obvious. One of my personal favorites is probably Winter Garden, because that was when I, I took the leap to become a beginning historical novelist. And I think this is really the best place for me to be right now. I just love historical lost stories about women.
And I know, Kristin, that you mentioned that Firefly Lane is kind of autobiographical. Can you talk a little bit about that? You mentioned that in our Book Lovers Ball group, but I'd love to hear about that piece in this setting as well.
Well, I had written many contemporary novels sort of about women's issues and women's lives prior to that. And I got to the point where I wanted to write what I thought of as an epic anthem to my generation of women. I was about 40, I guess, and I just thought it was time for me to write about the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the things that that my generation of women were looking at. And at some point along the way, it also ended up becoming the book where I finally found the strength to look at my mother's life, to try to understand my life, her life. I had lost her to breast cancer 20 years before. And I'm sure a lot of women and men listening to this right now know the hole that the loss of a mother leaves. And so as I became a mother, I realized I was constantly searching for my mother's life. And the best way for me to discover her was to write about her. And so those two stories came together, this anthem of my generation and my look at my mother's life, to create this book that was not only deeply personal to me, but also had something very important to say about women and healthcare and cancer and sort of the end of life and families and all of that. And a small interesting aside to that is, when I began the book, I was the age my mother was when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And when I finished the book, I was the age she was that she passed away. And so in retrospect, I feel like she was with me, informing that story and telling her story to some extent through me.
Wow, that timing is just so impactful and beautiful at the same time. Yeah. So, really this leads into, I think, a really good next question. And this person would like to know, of all of your works, which period piece or which work that you've written do you consider to be your hardest to have written?
Oh, that's interesting. I would say the hardest was probably the Nightingale, because of all of my books, that's the time that I most struggled with self-confidence and whether I actually had the ability to write the book that was in my mind. And I realized that, I was essentially a women's fiction novelist, and I was taking on World War II and France and women. And I knew that the chances were that I could be judged very, very harshly. And more than that, that I could fail, that I could actually not be up to the task of writing this book that I consider to be very important. So that was probably, the most difficult one, because I had to really dig in and create a fully historical voice for myself, which I had not had before.
Yeah. And our next question, kind of creating that voice for yourself and these fictional, periods. Can you talk about your research process specifically for your historical fiction?
Yeah, generally they begin with a question or a theme. That's sort of is what I begin with. The Nightingale, I had this story I had read in research about this woman, Andre Dujon, a 19-year-old Belgian woman who had created one of the first escape routes out of Nazi-occupied France. And I was so astounded that here's this 19-year-old woman saving young men, walking over the Pyrenees in her espadrilles, saving lives, and that this sort of epic and remarkable story had not been told was stunning to me. And so it started with that. And once I decided to do World War II France, and that, led me obviously to the occupation, the Nazi occupation, I realized that the other question that was out there that was so important to me to sort of understand and answer and follow and would inform the whole novel was, what would I do to save my child's life? And at what point, even more importantly, would I put my child at risk for something that I believed in? And that was sort of, all of the research kept leading me towards what is the answer to that question? And when would I put my child at risk? Would I put my child at risk? And that was sort of the beating heart of that book. And then, with the Four Winds, it was really this question of how did these people survive, and why did the vast majority of them decide to stay on their farms with all of the horror and difficulty of the Dust Bowl. And so I find a question like that, and then I just begin the massive general research of what was going on in the time, what was it like to live there, what was happening in politics, what would people have believed. And that sort of slowly funnels me in different directions. For example, when I picked the Great Depression, it funneled me towards the Dust Bowl of all the choices in America at the time, because that was to me the most dramatic, the most compelling place to be at that time. And once I pick the Dust Bowl, then I narrow it. And then ultimately I end up reading memoirs and diaries and newspaper articles and firsthand accounts. And I interview people if I can, because ultimately that's where I get the real sort of, secret sauce for my books.
So I think that we've all eaten and bought your secret sauce, hook, line, and sinker here in Pueblo, Colorado. One thing that we make sure that we do as part of All Pueblo Reads is we make sure that we have titles of our selected author, and your titles are here at the library and are checkoutable. And a lot of people in our audience this evening have the books that you have donated in their hands. But the next question that we have, I think, is from someone who read through your full catalog of novel offerings, or has tried to. But they would like to know where to start. Like, if you were to give advice on where to start with Kristin Hannah's books, where would you recommend they start? Which book would be first?
Well, gosh, the easy answer to that is The Nightingale. I would say The Nightingale, The Cradle on the Four Winds is a pretty great 1, 2, 3 beginning. Arguably, that's my best work. So if you go back from that, you might be disappointed. So maybe, just start with Firefly Lane and work forward from there.
I mean, as a huge fan of yours, I just don't know if you can go wrong starting anywhere at any point. So I think your selections are great. But speaking of Firefly Lane, one of the questions that we received in our night previously, and then also tonight, is in working to adapt Firefly Lane and the Nightingale and the upcoming The Great Alone. What is that process like? Is it exciting? Is it nerve-wracking? Is it hard to hand this off to someone to make it into a whole different art form? Can you talk about that?
Yes, all of the above. You know, first of all, I'm not terribly involved in the day-to-day process of what it is they're doing. Mostly because I'm too busy, and I sort of feel like if I don't want to take control of something, that I don't really want to be in the mix. That being said, I would say that the most important decision that I make in the entire process is, who do I give my property to? Who do I give the Four Winds to, or the Nightingale to, or Firefly Lane? And I try, to the best of my ability, to only give my properties to people who really share my sensibility or say they do, and really want to keep the heart and soul of the works intact, while understanding that it's a very different medium. I mean, people who read my books and love dialogue. And so almost by definition, they have to change my work for TV. I mean, otherwise there'd, be a lot of people sitting around thinking a lot, and that doesn't translate so well.
We don't want people thinking.
No thinking. Not in Hollywood.
No. We've received quite a few questions from people, I think, who have read books like Firefly Lane and Fly Away Home and Homefront, and then they moved over to the Nightingale and the Great Alone, and the Four Winds. And a lot of them are wondering about your transition from, fiction to historical fiction. Can you talk a little bit about that? Have you always been a history buff? Was there just something that flipped that made you want to go from, one genre to another?
Well, I mean, as we talked about earlier, in one of these formats, I, started in historical romance. So I started historical. I've always been a history buff. I'm a huge, historical reader. But yeah, I took a lot of years, honing my contemporary voice and writing contemporary novels. And I really, people say that it's all very different, and that I've changed in some way. I don't think I've changed as much as I've grown. As I've gotten older, I have made the choice, at least at the moment, to really focus on women's stories and women's issues. And I have a few that are historical and contemporary mix. I have some that are historical. Great Alone won the Goodreads Awards for historical fiction, and I wasn't even sure that the 70s was historical. So I didn't know that I had, stayed historical. I felt like I was just moving in the direction of the next story that I wanted to tell.
Yeah. I guess I didn't even think about the Great Alone kind of being historical fiction. I feel like my mother would slap me for saying that.
I know. I was like, I was alive then. Are we really going to call that historical fiction? I'm not sure.
So, a lot of people kind of want to know, obviously, kind of the subject of your books. And, we featured you as part of All Pueblo Reads, and we talked about mental wellness. But, there's a lot of things that it seems that are near and dear to your heart, like military, with the Great Alone and PTSD, with Homefront and its entire spectrum of topics that we talked about. But do you bring a lot of your own personal interests, beliefs, advocacy into your work?
I don't come from a military background. I can't even remember, now it seems like I've written several military / war related books. And I think part of that, of course, is simply this idea of ordinary and extraordinary heroism, which is something that is just deeply ingrained in me. And I love writing about, and I love exploring it. It has, with like Homefront and PTSD, and even the Great Alone and PTSD, it is something that I feel very strongly about, how we treat our troops, both at home and away, and how we take care of them when they come home. That has become somewhat of a passion of mine. And so I find that I keep being drawn to those stories because I want to keep the dialogue open. I want us as a country to continue to have this dialogue.
Wow, yeah. And kind of along the lines of dialogue, I want to read one more question about kind of your subjects. And this person just says, I love Kristin Hannah's books and how strong the female characters are. You don't see that in every book that you read, especially growing up. Can you talk a little bit about the strength that you give your female characters and why you choose to have them be just the triumphant characters in all of your books?
Yeah, I mean, I just think courage is so important in life, and I think it doesn't maybe get the play that it needs to, but all of us are faced with moments in our life, starting from when we're young throughout our life, whether it's as a mother, a daughter, a sister, a son, a brother, where where we have to be courageous in the face of what feels like debilitating fear. And I think it's just really crucial to pass along stories. I mean, that's what fiction is. That's what reading is. It is we as a people passing along the stories of our lives, the stories of our history, and using those stories to connect as a community and to help each other stand and rise and stay standing. And so I really want to be a part of the kind of narrative that promotes courage and community and gratitude.
Well, I think everyone just wants to have coffee and wine with you because you're such an inspirational, mature person in all of your answers. I know I do.
Okay.
Oh, okay, great. We'll set the date up, okay?
Okay.
All right. So we have time for one more question. And this question kind of goes back to your setting. So the people really would like to know, do you visit the sites of where you write about? Do you travel there? More specifically, someone would like to know, did you have someone that grew up or was raised in the era or in the region of the Dust Bowl?
I do. Well, okay, first of all, for the first half of my career when I was a young mother, I really wrote books set in places that I knew very well. Most of them were in Western Washington or Western Oregon or Southern California, places that I had lived, places that I had grown up, that I knew very well, that I didn't have to do that kind of research. I didn't have to leave home to go research. But starting sometime after Firefly Lane, I really began to write novels that required me to go to the places, to interview people, to go to the museums and try to get as much firsthand information as I could. And it's a great process. It really helps. It really makes, I think, gives a better level of understanding on the author's part. So yeah, I went to Texas and Oklahoma and spent a lot of time there, and drove to California from there, went up to Fresno and visited all those areas. There's still the migrant camp that I based the migrants in the Four Winds on is still there, and there's a small museum, and that was really great to see the actual size of the cabins that they were living in.
Wow, that is really interesting that you were able to visit that.
Yeah, amazing.
Huh. Yeah, I mean that would be a great resource for us to put out there for our readers. So we'll look that up, and that way they know where that is. And they can
I think actually a lot of that stuff is on my website. So I think they can go to KristinHannah.com, and there's the pictures that I took on that trip are there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kristin. And as our kind of parting question before we end, can you just let us know what's in store for you in the future? What's your next project, and what can we expect to see from you coming up?
Well, I will have a new book coming out in February of 2024. I am desperately searching for a title, so I don't yet know what it's going to be called. You'd think after 3 years I would have an idea, but I still do not. And interestingly enough, this may be my favorite book so far. It's another historical novel, and it's about a young woman who comes of age in a really turbulent time, and has to work her way through it, like a lot of my books, I guess.
So between now and then, the things that we have to keep us satisfied, we have all the library books that you have helped us to purchase, so thank you. And we have season 2 of Firefly Lane, which comes out
December 2nd. Yeah.
Great. And we will stay posted for all of the news about The Great Alone and about the Nightingale.
Well, thank you. Thank you to Pueblo and the library and your great questions. This has been super fun.
Great. Thank you, Kristin. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us this evening. Our community has enjoyed this literature that we've provided throughout All Pueblo Reads, whether it's the Kristin Hannah titles, the Alicia Ortega titles, or Ross Gay. Everything has been about mental health and mental wellness. And the library is a great resource for you to be able to seek any type of mental health or wellness resource that you may need. On your way out of any of our viewing parties, whether you're at the Rawlings Library or at the Pueblo West Library, please make sure that you pick up your free copy of a Kristin Hannah title. And again, thank you, Kristin, so much for your donation to us so that we can provide books to our community. That concludes our program this evening. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to check out the library website, your library program guide, and visit any of your local libraries for all the great things that we have going on. And that will be it for me this evening, and we will see you in 2023 for the 2023 All Pueblo Reads. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.